Hello there. Today I'm going to be taking a look at a sweet wine from Hungary. This is a Tokaj from a producer called Disznoko. This is their Late Harvest and it's the 2020 vintage of that. It's coming in a half-litre bottle, which is the tradition for Tokaj. Now there's a culture of producing sweet wines in the Tokaj region here in the foothills of the Carpathian Mountains in northeastern Hungary, and this is where you get two rivers, the Bodrog and the Tisza, meeting, and at this confluence of a warm river from the plains with a cooler river bringing water down from the mountains creates ideal conditions for the production of fogs and mists. And these early morning mists in the vineyards create botrytis. This is a fungus that grows on the berries, makes the skins of the berries porous and allows water out of them. And the result of this is to concentrate sugar and acidity in the wine, enabling you to create a sweet wine that is balanced, because as well as having high sugar levels, it has high acidity levels as well. The botrytis fungus also helps to modify the flavours and gives us a lovely honeyed note to the wines. Now the method of producing these wines, by macerating these what are called Aszú berries, the dried Aszú berries that have been affected by botrytis, in wines or fermenting must, is one that goes back to the 1630s. Disznoko, an equally historic location. The name Disznoko evidently means wild boar rock, and this acknowledges an outcrop of volcanic rock right in the middle of the Disznoko vineyard. This location is recorded in a land register in Hungary going back to 1413. And certainly wine was being made there at least in the 1730s, because in 1732, in the first classification of the vineyards at Tokaj, Disznoko was classified as a first growth. Now traditionally the vineyards in this area would have been owned by noble families. However, in the Tokaj region, under communism, these vineyards were nationalized in the second half of the 20th century. With the fall of the Soviet bloc, you see from the early 90s the ability to invest in this area, and in 1992 a French insurance group, AXA, through their winemaking arm AXA Millésimes, purchased the lands that they combined to create what is now the Disznoko estate. And AXA own a number of really quite prestigious wine estates. There's Château Pichon Baron in Pauillac, a second growth. There's Quinta de Noval, one of the great port houses, Clos in Nuit Saint-Georges. So Disznoko immediately became part of a very high quality portfolio of wine estates. Late Harvest is a style that only came about in the mid-90s, post the fall of communism, with the idea of trying to create a value for money, entry-level expression of the wines of Tokaj. So it's a wine where the grapes are picked not necessarily with botrytis, but in some cases simply sweet late harvest grapes. There's no requirement for oak aging. The idea being that this should be a fairly straightforward style with an emphasis on lovely ripe fruit, one that can be drunk quickly and doesn't need to sit in your cellar for a long period of time. And more recently, as the 3 and 4 puttonyos styles of Tokaj have been phased out, this has taken over their niche very much. There is certain overlap with the Zamorodny style, but that has to be oak aged, so it should be the purest fruit expression of Tokaj. So the wine's called Late Harvest in 2020. That harvest went on between the 20th of October and the 10th of November. Everything would have been hand-picked, and instead of picking berry by berry as you would do when you were picking Aszú, whole bunches are being picked. So some of each bunch may have been affected by botrytis, or the grapes may simply have been very ripe at the end of harvest. These bunches were whole bunch pressed, which give you lovely clean juice. Fermentation went on primarily in stainless steel tanks. I believe some of it may have fermented in oak barrel as well, but the majority in stainless steel tanks, with temperature control so the fermentation can be slowed down, just to emphasize those lovely fruit perfumes. Now this particular wine is primarily Furmint, a grape variety that's particular to Tokaj, a grape variety that's very late ripening but maintains its acidity really well and is quite prone to botrytis. And that made up 95% of the blend, with the balance being a grape variety called Zeta, a grape variety once known as Ormus, but now Zeta. Evidently that's a crossing between Furmint and another variety called Bouvier. It tends to be a slightly earlier ripening version of Furmint, so it still keeps quite good acidity but gets a little extra richness and is also prone to botrytis. Now, this particular wine did age in oak, so there will be a little bit of oak influence, and it did spend 12 months in barriques. Assuming that they're following the same practice as the other Disznoko wines, that would include both French and Hungarian oak. But the barrels being used here are those that have been used 2 or 3 times before. So there shouldn't be any overt oak influence coming into this one. Now, having spent 12 months in barrel, the wine was blended in January 2022 and then bottled in the May of that year, having spent the intervening time in tank. I looked at the technical statistics of this, and this has 90 grams per litre of sugar, so this should be a fully sweet wine. But as I say, one of the things about botrytis is it should give you a balanced sweet wine with both sugar and acidity. So yes, this has 90 grams of sugar. It's also got 7.4 grams of acidity, and that's relatively high. So I'm expecting a balanced, fresh, sweet wine with lovely fruit expression. So let's see if it lives up to that, shall we? I mean, the first thing to say is looking at the colour, that's a pale to medium yellow. The wine has 12.5% alcohol, and it's forming tears very readily on the side of the glass. So that's not the alcohol doing that, that is that 90 grams per litre of sugar. Now, if this were possibly even a Zamorodny, but a 5 puttonyos or a 6 puttonyos Tokaj, that would be much more golden in colour. So that's an obvious difference there to the more classic styles of Tokaj. So let's see what we make of the aroma, shall we? Principally, that's a really ripe, I would almost say unctuous, slightly oily, heading towards being honeyed or syrupy, sort of stone fruit note. So ripe nectarine, ripe peach, through to ripe apricot. Almost, as I say, slightly overripe, slightly oily. There's something sort of slightly high-toned about the nature of the aromas, almost slightly as if you've got bruised apple notes there. I guess there are also hints of citrus as well. It's a fairly straightforward aroma. It's got a nice intensity. So let's have a taste. Well, that's certainly sweet, and that rich, slightly oily textured stone fruit note is coming through there. Again, like very, very ripe nectarine, through to a rich, more sort of apricot-y note. There may be hints of vanilla, almost a sort of a slightly almondy touch as well. But there's not obvious oak structure there. That oily nature is giving a nice, rounded richness to the fruit. This is sort of medium to full bodied. The alcohol certainly isn't intruding on the fruit, but there's plenty of fruit flavour. Now, the acidity's been present all the time. I can feel myself salivating ever so slightly down the sides of my mouth. And what that's meaning is that the finish is not cloying. There's still some sweetness. There's some slightly honeyed, maybe more sort of lifted honeysuckle notes. There's a touch of perfume on the finish there. There are hints of golden syrup, treacle, those sort of notes, but the freshness is stopping this wine from being too honeyed and sweet at the end. And it's keeping it lively, giving it some really quite good length. This may not be a wine that has the complexity of a great 5 puttonyos Tokaj. However, I think it is delivering some really beautiful, clean fruit. It's a wine that has a lovely balance, it has good intensity, the flavours are lasting well. It's not a wine I'm going to need to leave in the cellar for a long time. Actually, I think this is delivering a lot to like. Like I say, it's not going to compete with the 5 puttonyos Tokaj, but it is showing you the character of the sweet wines of this region. I'll leave a link in the notes below to the Wine Searcher webpage for this vintage of this wine, so you can see the price in your market and you can see where it's available, and you can use that page and the tabs on it to find out all sorts of other things about this wine, sort of where it's from, more about the grape varieties. You can find out about the producer, pricing, critics' notes, what other users have said, all that sort of stuff. So, the idea is that that information is there to help you make some informed decisions about buying the wine if you want to. But what I'd say is I think this style and this particular wine offers great value for money. The Wine Searcher aggregated critics score for this was 89 out of 100. I could possibly say that that score should have been 90, but that's a pretty decent score for a wine that's not a particularly expensive sweet wine. And while I'm saying you don't need to age it, I should imagine you could keep that in the cellar for 5 or 6 years and you would gain some additional complexity as it ages. I think this is a wine that's delivering some really good value for money and acts as a really lovely entry point to taste a wine from Tokaj and to get an idea of the sort of quality and style that can come from that region. So thank you so much for watching. I do hope you've enjoyed the tasting. If you have, do please press the like button. If you've got any views that you want to share, do please pop those in the comments box below. We'd love to know what you think about the wines we're looking at, the tastings we're doing, or anything else that relates to that. If you have any friends you think might like to watch, do please feel free to pass the video on to them. We'd really appreciate your endorsement in that way. That would be fabulous. So yes, thank you so much for joining us, and I do hope you'll manage to make some time, come and join us for another tasting in the very near future. Till then, bye for now.